La la la, hey, hey, yeah, yeah.
Welcome back to the show. It's time again for another edition of Money Monday with Judith Kane. And today we're talking about the family cottage.
Yes.
We all love going to the cottage, and many families decide that they'll pass it on to their children from generation to generation.
Many children hope.
Many children hope. Children out there are going, please. But there are implications when you do such a thing, and that's why Judith Kane joins us today from Entera Financial to tell us about this.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
And I think a lot of people buy a cottage, and down the road, that's what they want to do. They want to hand it down to their families or their children, but there are major implications involved. Let's talk about those implications.
I think when people buy a cottage, they don't really think about what's going to happen, down the road. They buy the cottage for the enjoyment of their families, friends, and then what happens is the kids get older, and the first thing that might happen is they might decide to sell the cottage.
Right.
Right.
So what happens with that is if they bought the cottage for $100,000 and the cottage is now worth $200,000, when they go to sell that cottage, there's capital gains tax payable on the gain of the value of that cottage.
Okay, so there's tax on that 100,000 that
Correct.
it went. Okay.
Correct, on 50% of that 100,000. Yeah, so it could be, and then whatever your tax rate is on that 50%, so the $50,000 would be taxable. So that's the first thing that can happen with a cottage, and lots of people do that. They buy a cottage when the kids are young, then as they start to get older, teenage years, later years, the
When
kids...
people, they're not going anymore,
Yes,
they're not
or
jumping in the lake.
they moved away and they,
Right?
that's right, they've moved away and there's no interest in the cottage, and the parents aren't interested, they'd like to travel or something.
Right, sure.
So that's the first thing that can happen. The second thing that can happen is that parents buy a cottage and they have a number of children, and how do they equitably pass the cottage down to the children? So there's a bit of a psychology around it too. You may have 3 children and one of them comes to the cottage on a regular basis, does maintenance around it, really works on the cottage, and the other 2 are, one's in Halifax and the other's in Vancouver, and how do the parents equitably decide to split the estate on the death of both of them? So that can all be done through your will, where you might leave money to the other children and you might leave the cottage to the 3rd child who likes to come to the cottage and really enjoys it. But that all comes at a price, because if you change ownership of the cottage, so if the parents both die and leave the cottage to the children, the same thing happens with capital gains.
Okay.
And you may have a 40-year gain or a 30-year gain or a 20-year gain on the cottage. Now, we know that cottage prices have increased substantially over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So it can be a significant cost, and I know of a lot of people who've had to sell their cottages because they just can't afford to pay the tax.
The upfront money.
That's right. So the estate, the children who are running the estate, had to sell the cottage because there wasn't any money to pay the tax on the gain of the
Wow,
cottage.
so just to have it in your will and just to change the ownership, they're paying the same tax as if it was sold.
That's right.
Wow,
It doesn't seem fair.
It doesn't seem fair, especially
No.
because if you will money, you don't have to pay anything on the money.
No, and a principal residence is also, can be sold with no taxes payable on the gain of that principal residence. So if the parents decided to move to the cottage full time and that became their principal residence, then you avoid that.
Ah.
So that's why you see a lot of people, especially in Eastern Ontario, building their dream home on some of the beautiful lakes we have, and same with Quebec, because they move out of where they were and they live there full time, and one of the reasons is because they can now pass that house into the estate, and it's on a tax-free basis.
Is this true with all second properties? Like if it's not your principal, say you have a condo down south, you have whatever, so no matter what it is, it's considered an investment, not a residence?
That's right. So early on in buying the cottage, what people should do is they should talk to their financial advisor and their lawyer to figure out how they're going to, move the cottage to the next generation if that's what they want to do. And if you have a property in the States, it's even more of a concern because they do have death taxes in the States.
Right.
Now there's limits. Under a certain amount, there's not anything payable, but you really need to know the tax rules, and you really need to deal with a really good tax accountant. So I would suggest for people who have cottages to look into what the cost would be of passing it down to the next generation, and talk to your kids, because one of the ways you can do it, one of the easy ways, is just to buy an insurance policy. And that money is there when the parents die to pay the taxes on the cottage.
So just a life insurance policy
Just a
then.
simple life insurance policy.
Specifically for that?
Specifically for
Okay,
that.
so separate to your normal...
Correct.
Okay.
The other thing you can do is you can what they call crystallize the capital gain. So you can say, now I'm going to, as if we've sold the cottage, move it into a family trust.
Okay.
So the taxes on a trust are much less than a capital gain. So you have to pay the tax on the capital gain upon moving it into a family trust, and after that the taxes, it can be in perpetuity. So eventually the taxes will have to be paid, but the kids can enjoy the cottage.
Why did they put this in place in the first place, the capital gains on this second residence?
Well, I think that it's just part of our tax system. That's I don't know.
Just
That's
for
an
more
excellent
money.
question.
Just for
Yeah.
more money,
The
really.
first time on this show you've ever asked me a question I didn't know the answer to. I will get you the answer, Derek.
Why do we have to
Sounds
pay
good.
capital gains on our investments too? Find that out. Well, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, it's true. Judith, thank you so much.
My
Always a pleasure
pleasure.
having you on the
We
show.
love having you.
Before you go to purchase that family cottage, keep those things in mind, or give Judith a call. She'll help you right through this,
She's
right?
got all the
It's
answers.
as simple as that. We're going to
Apparently.
be talking a little Father's Day in the kitchen coming up next with Stephen from the Marriott Ottawa. Don't go away. We'll be right back right after this.
Yeah, thanks for the hardball.
Hey.